Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Response, Recovery and Resilience Expo, proudly brought to you by Wollondilly Shire Council, Wingecarribee Shire Council, Resilience New South Wales, and the National Recovery and Resilience Agency. My name's Natalie, and I'm the Community Recovery Officer at Wollondilly Shire Council.
Good morning, I'm Corinne Buxton, Community Recovery Officer for Wingecarribee Shire Council.
Good morning, I'm Kim Hill and I'm the Recovery Support Officer with the National Recovery and Resilience Agency.
We're just going to start the morning with an Acknowledgement of Country from Melissa Wire from Wingecarribee Shire Council.
On behalf of Wingecarribee Shire Council and Wollondilly Shire Council, I would like to acknowledge the Gundungurra and Dharawal people as they are the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work. I acknowledge the spiritual connections to the land, waters and sky. I'd like to pay my respect to the ancestors, our elders past and present, and to the future generations. I'd also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are watching today. In my language, Jingiwala. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Melissa. So as you all may be aware, this event originally was due to be scheduled as a face-to-face event. However, unfortunately, with the ongoing COVID-19 restrictions in New South Wales, we have shifted the event to a virtual event. So thank you all for joining us on Zoom, to our presenters from across the state and to all of our registered participants from across the state as well, particularly our local residents in Wollondilly and Wingecarribee Shire. We will be hosting this event next year face-to-face in April, and we're really looking forward to building on this virtual schedule that we have here and delivering that as a full face-to-face event with exhibitors and conference presentations and the opportunity for people to meet and interact with the different services that are participating and to access all the great information that we have coming to you throughout the content as well. We're going to start our official presentations this morning with a video from the New South Wales RFS Commissioner, Rob Rogers.
I'm Rob Rogers, Commissioner of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. Thanks for having me here today to talk a little bit about resilience in the context of bushfire. And resilience is obviously more than bushfire, but one of the big impact things that has happened to the state is that 2019-20 bushfire season that impacted on so many people across the state. And the recovery of that and the resilience of the community was a really important part of that. So I want to talk a little bit about the operation and then of course the resilience and recovery components of that. So firstly, that fire season at a glance, it's important to remember more than 160 days of continuous major operations in our State Operations Centre. 200 consecutive days of what we call a Section 44, which is basically like an emergency fire situation for the RFS, so more than 200 days of that. 11,300 fires across that period of time. 5.5 million hectares of bushland burnt, an extraordinary amount of vegetation destroyed during that fire season, which we haven't seen before. 3 state of emergency declarations made by the Premier, and more than 40 actual emergency declarations of fires. 59 days of total fire ban, 11 days of statewide total fire bans, 6,500 interstate and international personnel to help us fight those fires. And I guess the most telling, 26 fatalities, 2,400 homes destroyed, and 15,000 homes saved. And if you compare that with other fire seasons going back to the 1993-94 year, you can just see how big the impact is compared to previous seasons. So it's really a watershed time when you consider fire seasons. It's set a completely new benchmark of what could occur in fire throughout New South Wales. And obviously the new benchmark's going to be that 2019-20 fire season. You can see on this map the total area burnt, and it's clearly a lot of these fires originated in the mountainous areas, lightning strikes, but burnt then to the coast. And we saw that in the northern part of the state and the southern part of the state. And you can see just how much of New South Wales was blackened from those fires. And these fires crossed the borders in Queensland to New South Wales and Victoria to New South Wales, and of course, and I shouldn't forget about the ACT. It certainly crossed there as well. Following that fire, as you would expect when it's impacted on so many people, the government initiated a review into the fires. And certainly the New South Wales government initiated a review which was from former Police Deputy Commissioner Dave Owens and former Chief Scientist Mary O'Kane. So they looked at the inquiry, they conducted an inquiry into those fires, and they made a number of recommendations. Indeed, they made 76 recommendations and a further 109 sub-recommendations. And they're all about trying to learn what we did well, what we can improve on, and indeed what we need to do to make sure that the RFS and indeed the community is ready for another fire of that magnitude sometime in the future. And that's really what it's about. It's not about fault finding, it's trying to understand what works, what didn't, and what we need to do better next time. And you know, for our organisation, we're a learning organisation, and we learn from events like that. And people that lost homes or lost loved ones will expect that. They expect that people learn lessons from things like this, and we obviously try and make sure we do even better. But I'm incredibly proud of the work that both the firefighters from all the agencies that came together, but also everybody behind the scenes, the police, the ambulance, but importantly the community. And the community made a big difference here because they had that level of resilience in some of the communities, and having some of the areas better prepared and more supported makes firefighters' jobs enormously easy compared to somewhere where either the community's not there or they haven't done any preparation and they're not there engaged and supporting each other. So you cannot overestimate the importance of a well-prepared and resilient community, and that's obviously a theme of what we're talking here. So I guess it's important, and that you can just see how important that is when you see the number of places that have been saved, and that a large part is obviously firefighters, but also the community. If we talk specifically about the Wallandilly and Wingecarribee area from that fire season, so in Wallandilly there were 16 homes destroyed and 17 damaged. Wingecarribee 68 destroyed and a further 18 damaged. But that was a lot of outbuildings as well that were destroyed there, not just homes. But that's a perfect example of areas that could have been a lot worse if it wasn't for the responsiveness of those communities and making sure that they prepared their home, they had a bushfire survival plan, whether it's formal or informal, they had a plan and they did some preparatory work ahead of time just to make sure they understood and made sure that their property's in the best possible shape to withstand fire. And one of the other things is to make sure that they're connected with neighbours and that they're not just let everyone for themselves. If everybody collaborates and makes sure they help each other in that preparation, but also when the fire impacts, knowing where people that might be vulnerable live, making sure you look out for them. In those sort of instances, you cannot rely on just leaving it to authorities. Authorities and fire agencies and police and ambulance will do everything they can, and our focus is clearly on saving lives, but we can't be everywhere at every time. We need the community to work with us. So this again, I think reinforces that whole thing about resilience of community. and obviously being the eyes and ears of the fire agencies, and that helps us enormously, letting us know where fires are so we can get out warnings. So it's really important, and I think that hopefully that will be part of the themes that come through this conference, is making sure that that importance is there. And I think also the community coming together after the fires, and we're seeing a picture here of the playground at Buxton to memorialise Andrew and Jeff and the loss of them, and there's a beautiful memorial there, and that's community driven. And a big shout out to Kim, and I know who's there, who was very instrumental in making this happen. But look, that's been really supported by the community, and I think that just goes to show that people genuinely care and they do want to make a difference, and they certainly have made a difference there. And but again, and that's part of recovery, because the community recovering, the firefighters recovering, enables them to be ready for the next challenge, and so the community certainly played a part there. In talking about the season outlook now, we're in obviously a lot better situation than we were in that 2019-20. But notwithstanding that, fire's always going to occur. They always happen, and indeed there's 50 or 60 fires every day that happens throughout the state. So you just don't hear about them because firefighters get on top of them very quickly. But the grassland areas are the big risk for us over last year and this year, because we've had extraordinary rainfall right throughout the state, and then that's obviously caused a lot of grass to grow, and that's not just out in the west, obviously east of the ranges as well. There's grassland areas, and a lot of destocking occurred because of the drought. We had 4 years of drought, people got rid of all their stock, and that hasn't yet been rectified. So there's a lot of growth out there, and that's obviously our focus. So if that rainfall does stop, then January, February, we're going to be quite concerned about what the potential for grass fires are. And irrespective of grass fires, it only takes a couple of really warm days and we'll still have bushfires. And those bushfires can cause devastations. They might not be the same size as 2019-20, but at the end of the day, if your home's in the middle of them and in the path of them, it really doesn't matter how big the bushfire is. If it's going to impact you, you still need to prepare. So don't be complacent. You can see here the 3-month outlook, and at the moment the outlook is still positive from a rainfall point of view. We're still going to see more rain on the coast, and obviously hopefully that keeps falling because that'll keep that grassland areas, as I mentioned, under control. But we need to be prepared if it isn't. You can see here some of the areas throughout the state where some of the grass growth is extraordinarily heavy, and these areas on that map show the more than average areas. So you can see it's not just one part of the state. There's quite a number of areas that have significant growth, and those red areas and the orange areas, they can carry very fast moving and quite ferocious fires. You can see here some of the work that the RFS has been doing outside of firefighting, and that is particularly about COVID, helping those agencies, those communities with COVID, certainly supporting health, helping set up things like base camps, helping with food deliveries for communities that are isolated, supporting people like SES for floods, helping those communities with floods. Our aviation and our people go out and help, supporting police in their operations. We sent crews to Canada to help them with fires, and also to Western Australia with cyclone support there. And you can see some of the people that have been involved in this, and some of the great people we have in the RFS. And I think one of the really good things about the people in the RFS is they're representative of their local community. So they're part of that resilience message for the local community. So becoming part of the RFS is about becoming resilient in your community, because you're providing more people to help more people in that local area or further afield. So one of the big things you can do to help your community be more resilient is becoming involved in the RFS. Doesn't mean you have to be a firefighter, but being involved helps teach you those skills about looking after your own home and your own family, but also helping your broader community. Some of the capability things you'll see there is what we're doing. And on the left, you'll see that there's a new building, an Aviation Centre of Excellence, which is about some of our simulators, building a building which will be the first of its type anywhere in the country to house aviation facilities, to train a new generation of particularly our air attack supervisors. They're the people in helicopters that control all the aircraft firefighting over a fire. We need to bring more of those people on board. Aviation firefighting is becoming a bigger component of our operations, and we need to make sure we've got the right number of people. We always run out of them, so this is something we want to put a focus on. You might remember in those fires where we had those red maps where we thought fires were going to impact on particularly bad days. We're going to look at improving that, bringing that into fires near me, and also we've got some jets that we've bought that will do specialised mapping to try and get maps out to people quicker so that people understand where these fires are. And again, an informed community is a better prepared community, so that's part of that. And also we're doing predetermined dispatch, so that's when we first, in certain areas where we first get a fire, we respond at the same time a fire truck, we respond an aircraft so that we can get onto these fires quicker and don't let them take hold. We're also looking at new advancements in bushfire management and looking at things like artificial intelligence with regards to plotting fires, working out what's at most risk, and looking at a new generation of how we use technology to help protect people. So we're doing that. New mapping systems, as I mentioned, with our citation aircraft, to better mapping to the community and to fire managers. So a lot of work is going on in that regards. Also our mitigation crews helping to protect communities. There's a lot of work that they're doing around the state, actually protecting communities, helping to create fire breaks behind those communities, and particularly some of those vulnerable areas in rural New South Wales. Some of the towns were really vulnerable, and putting in breaks between the bush and those towns makes a huge difference for the sustainability and resilience of those communities. And new bushfire risk plans are something that we're doing since those fires, and it's a whole new generation of plans right around the state. So in 3 years, we'll have a new bushfire risk plan everywhere throughout New South Wales. And this is really about saying what's at risk, how we are treating that risk, what are we doing about it, and then if that risk does get realised and we have a fire, how are we going to put that fire out quickly, bringing all the agencies together to make sure we're all working together. So these new plans are a new generation plan, and again with a lot more technology involved to try and make sure that we suppress these fires very quickly. The government's also introduced some new things, boundary clearing code, and that's again about enabling people to be resilient on their own property. So people in rural areas, so that they can clear vegetation on their boundary up to 25 metres. And this again just makes them able to stop fire entering their property or fire leaving their property. And it's about disrupting the fuel. So this enables people with a very little amount of bureaucracy to basically self-assess, and if they qualify for that scheme, go out and do that work. This is all about trying to get bureaucracy out of fire management, and where it's an appropriate thing and there's no significant environmental risks, allowing people to go in and do that work. Also, fire trails are a massive issue for us. Trying to make sure we've got fire trails in the right spot to where we know fires occur, to try and disrupt fire paths, make sure it's safe for firefighters. So we're not going to send firefighters down a road that doesn't have turnarounds, so it becomes quite a risky proposition. So we're government's spending an enormous amount of money, millions of dollars on fire trails, trying to make sure they're appropriate. And then fire behaviour training, so training a new generation of fire behaviour analysts to make sure that we're clearly looking at risk, looking at fire potential, where's the fire going to go, what communities are going to impact, and make sure we put all our people into those fires. Some of the things that we did, there was an enormous outpouring of donations to the RFS during those fires, and indeed some $100 million was donated. Now that goes into a dedicated trust to ensure that the money that comes in gets spent on our firefighters, and we've been very clear on that. It's about helping frontline people. And these listing here is some of the different programs, and certainly some of these are using the donated money, others are things that government's funded, but some of the helmets, new generation of helmets, we're looking at better rollover protection for our trucks. Government's invested, they basically doubled our program of reinvestment in the fleet to try and get a newer generation of truck with safer rollover systems, the halo protection for our people to make sure that everybody is as safe as we can make them. And you can see there just some of the types of things that we're looking at, and this is dispatch systems. There's a new fire danger rating system, so you'll see some changes to that. The signs you see beside the road that indicate fire danger, that's all being reviewed, and New South Wales is leading that. But there's a whole load of projects there that, as you can see, and I won't go through them all, that will just showing how we're changing the face of what the RFS is doing and how it's doing it to try and make sure, again, we're ready to meet the next significant fire season going forward. And then the future, you can see there that this is all about resilient communities, partnerships with other like organisations, and making sure that our membership is well resourced, connected technology-wise, and they have the right stations and the right equipment to use. Because at the end of the day, if we make the RFS resilient, that in turn helps make our community resilient. And I think that that's in all of our interests. So I guess my message to people in closing is to be resilient in your local community. Help your local community prepare. Make sure you are prepared. Make sure what you and your family know what you're going to do if a fire starts in the vicinity. Are you going to stay and defend your home, or are you going to leave? And if you're going to leave, where are you going to go? Have alternate ways of going there. And I think work together to understand the vulnerability of your community and make sure that, again, as I said before, help each other. It's not everyone for themselves. This is about a community coming through these things. So work together. Make sure that you help each other, and most of all, look after each other, because homes can be rebuilt, any infrastructure can be rebuilt, but lives can't be. And even people that get serious injuries from fire, they're things that are life-changing, and they're things that will be with someone forever. So we don't want people hurt. If we need to lose homes, we lose homes, but lives are the absolute most important thing. So please enjoy the rest of the conference, and please do that preparatory work I mentioned on your home and help your neighbours. And most of all, stay safe. Thanks very much for having me.
So a huge thank you to Commissioner Rob Rogers for putting that video together for us. And I think that sets the context really nicely for the Response, Recovery and Resilience Expo. So this is day 2 today of the Expo, and we are recording all of the sessions so that they can be watched back in the future by people unable to attend online, and that they'll be there as a resource for the future as well. So the need for this Expo did originally, I guess, stem from the 2019-20 bushfires. However, the Wollondilly and Wingecarribee Shires have both experienced a number of disaster events in recent times that really highlight the need for us to be prepared, and the need for us to share the information that can assist people in their recovery journey as well. So a huge thank you to Rob Rogers for that video. We have shared in the chat today the information around some of our local mental health services. So thank you to Corinne for sharing that information there. There may be some imagery in some of the presentations today that will possibly be quite triggering for people. So just a reminder that there are supports out there, free mental health supports and wellbeing supports that can assist people through those feelings that they might be experiencing after seeing some imagery of these disaster events. Just an acknowledgement that we have gone through some recent disaster events as well that are in the very, very early days of recovery in Shire with the severe storm event that we've experienced recently. I will now hand over to Corinne.
Beautiful. I'd like to now welcome Dominic Lane from Resilience New South Wales. Dominic Lane is currently the Executive Director, Operational Management and Partnership for Resilience New South Wales. Dominic oversees and leads Resilience New South Wales operational support during a major crisis and recovery, working in partnership with the Resilience New South Wales Local Coordination and Service Delivery Division and other emergency management agencies and co-delivery partners. Dominic was Chief Executive of the South Australia Fire and Emergency Services Commission and Chair of the SA SafeCom Board. Dominic has held a range of management and senior executive functions in the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. He was appointed Commissioner of the ACT Emergency Services Agency in 2013 and held that role up until 2019. Dominic has a proven commitment to good governance and deep commitment to contributing to improved resilience and recovery outcomes, a connection to community partnerships, and a strong sense of service as a senior public sector leader. Welcome, Dominic.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Hopefully I'm coming through okay. I do seem to be having a bit of trouble with bandwidth this morning, so just checking if I can just get a thumbs up from Natalie or someone that you can hear me okay, thanks.
All good, Dominic, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. Look, as you know, Resilience New South Wales, many of you would be aware, is a new organisation. We've born out of the ashes in many ways of the 2019-20 bushfire season. So I will be reflecting a little bit on some of the areas that Commissioner Rogers did cover. But I think it's very important because at this time, we're very much trying to work out how we go ahead, and we can't do that without looking back from where we have come. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak at this wonderful initiative, and a big thanks to our partners, Wallandilly and Wingecarribee Councils, and of course the National Recovery and Resilience Agency. So with that, it's certainly a privilege, and if we can just reflect over to the next one, going forward a couple of slides there to our state map and the compounding disasters within New South Wales. And as Rob Rogers mentioned before, the unprecedented 2019-20 bushfire season in some ways wasn't a surprise. And as we saw throughout, and well, basically from my recollection, it really started back in 2018, extremely dry spring and early summer. And whilst the season wasn't that significant, by the time we got to August 2019, all of the indicators were there in relation to a very challenging summer ahead. Excuse me. And so what you can see there is the seasonal outlooks that the Australasian Fire and Emergency Services Authorities put together in collaboration with the Bureau of Meteorology and the Bushfire Natural Hazards Cooperative Research Centre to see the potential impact of that season. And when you look at it from a nationwide perspective, it certainly played out. And from the 2 years I had in South Australia as the Chief Executive of the South Australian Fire and Emergency Services Commission, we certainly saw the impact of that across Southeast and South Australia, as well as, of course, Kangaroo Island. And so if we move forward as the season unfolded, you'll recall on the next slide, we were in those drought conditions in many parts of New South Wales. In August 2019, we saw the impact really starting to come through. And again, not only in New South Wales, but as I mentioned before, Queensland was already having significant fire operations by then. And by August 21, LGAs had already commenced their bushfire danger period, which of course is quite significant when you consider the statutory bushfire danger period normally starts at the beginning of October. And so as we went into September of 2019, we saw the significance of these events starting to unfold on the next slide in relation to how we can, the impact in the northern New South Wales across that period of September, with significant fires already starting in what's called that first Section 444 declaration that Rob talked about, as well as then going into September, we got to the stage in New South Wales where there was already 1,300 bush and grass fires, and already, as I said before the normal start of the bushfire season, 4 total fire ban days declared. And then into October, the story really started to unfold, as you would be aware, across the mid-north coast and into closer into Sydney, with the trigger of the most significant Gospers Mountain fire, and of course at that stage started to see significant impact, including fatalities. So throughout November, we New South Wales had its first catastrophic fire danger ratings across the heavily impacted areas of Sydney, the Hunter and the Illawarra Shoalhaven, including into the Wallandilly and Wingecarribee areas. And those fires across the mid-north coast continued to expand and impact. And then, by the time December came around, the impact was definitely impinging on all of us with those catastrophic days once again. Thanks very much. And so we all recall, whether we were in New South Wales or, as I said, for myself, in South Australia, the impact was starting to be seen in many, many parts of the nation. And then into January, the real impact started to hit into southern New South Wales. And fortunately, by February, we started to see some respite, even though from a Resilience New South Wales perspective, there started to be some significant impact in relation to what we were starting to see from a flooding perspective all of a sudden. And that's just the vagaries of the weather that we sometimes are impacted by. But then just moving forward to the next slide. And hopefully that's coming up in a minute. As Rob said, he gave some of those statistics in relation to the significant impact across New South Wales. Nearly 12,000 fires, high intensity operations that went particularly for the Rural Fire Service for 160 days, and those bushfire emergencies, and that were declared for over 200 days, nearly 5 to 6 months, and the impact of that 5.5 million hectares. And hopefully my slides will catch up in a minute. If we can just go to the next one. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Dominic, we were up I'm wondering if there's might be a bit of delay. We're just at the slide with the maps after the statistics.
Great, thank you. Sorry, it's a bit of a delay at my end. And so I think the map just demonstrates the impact between, so beyond the statistics, as I've mentioned. So the map, obviously, we always try and plan from a fire and emergency services perspective in relation to the predicted outcomes. But unfortunately, the impact, as you can see from where the potential danger was, certainly unfolded in relation to that map. And then if we can just go on to the next slide as well, then thanks, beyond the map, the one after the map, and the damage that was impacted and significantly, very significantly within Wallandilly and Wingecarribee as well. As we know, more than 40 local government areas were impacted, almost 2,500 homes destroyed, significantly, as Commissioner Rogers mentioned, but lots of significant saves across New South Wales, and it's estimated some 15,000 homes were directly saved by the firefighting operations, which is an incredibly impressive effort by the emergency services of New South Wales. But as we also know, billions of dollars of damage, not only to homes and livelihoods, but across primary production. The agriculture sector was significantly hit, as well as significant impact on the forestry industry and many, many regional businesses. And hopefully my computer's just being a bit slow here, but if we can just keep clicking through the slides to also acknowledge the tragic loss that did occur over the 2019-20 season. South Australia, in some ways, was a little fortunate, but of course suffered 3 horrendous fatalities as part of the firefighting operations. And so within New South Wales, those 26 people that were killed, including the 7 firefighters, remains us with close memories for us all through that terrible period. So if we can just keep moving through, thank you. So as we know, at the height of the activity, as mentioned before, more than 2,500 firefighters in the field each shift, 200,000 firefighting shifts across those nearly 12,000 firefighters. But if we can just keep scrolling through, we'll see some of those images of the fact that our firefighters not only came from within New South Wales, but also supported from across Australia as part of the interagency effort. So whether it was Fire and Rescue New South Wales, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, the Forestry Commission, as well as the volunteer agencies of the SCS and of course the RFS, alongside our paramedic colleagues and many others that helped out. It was a true interagency effort. And of course led to significant strengthening of collaboration and coordination, which we'll see and I'll talk to a little bit more in terms of our current operations. And supported, as you would be aware, by an Australian effort, the South Australian Country Fire Service. If we can just keep clicking through the slides, had continuous shifts into northern and New South Wales until just before, from late September until just before Christmas, when of course we started to be impacted over there by our own significant firefighting operations. But so we had the interstate, the intrastate, as well as the international effort that helped, and people coming from all over the world, which is a really significant outcome. And so a big, all we know as a community, a big thanks to our firefighters in the field and all of those that supported them around that at the time. But moving more towards now, the role of Resilience New South Wales, and the fact that it was born out of this very significant operation. The unprecedented fire event has led to the unprecedented recovery effort. And one of the things that we're very proud of within Resilience New South Wales is that we're able to support events like today, which are all part of the ongoing recovery of what the community is going through. So whether it's in relation to the more than 8,000 people, again, record amounts of people that were provided with emergency accommodation, the work that's been done in relation to the establishment of the temporary accommodation pods, which we continue to still work through, and the various recovery support services that Resilience New South Wales, in partnership with our Commonwealth colleagues and our local government colleagues, we've been able to establish. So one of the big things that we're very proud of is also the establishment of the 22 community recovery offices, of which our local ones on the ground in Mullumbimby and Wingecarribee continue to do fantastic work. And it's great to see the partnership that we have with councils in relation to their ongoing work, and the fact that in many parts of the state we're able to extend their roles for a little bit longer to help people through many things. Big supports in relation to, we just go to some of the next slides. Thank you very much. In relation to things like legal services, the establishment of the Bushfire Local and Economic Recovery Fund with our Commonwealth partners, and the industry recovery packages that we've been able to establish, particularly for some of those areas devastated and devastatingly impacted as part of that. As we know, more than all those, because of the devastating impact, more than 3,600 properties cleaned up, and again, a good coordination effort across government, but also with our private sector counterparts, and a really good collaboration across all of those sorts of things. And then moving on in relation to the work of our accommodation pods, it's something that was born by necessity, and very much an example of our way we're partnering going forward, and the work that's been done in relation to working with our community partners, and which I'll talk to a little bit later on this, has been extremely significant. And so whilst Many of us would be aware that the pods aren't exactly luxurious accommodation. They've been born by necessity to provide support to those people that allow people to stay on their property that has been devastatingly impacted while the very challenging rebuild program continues, which is brought on by some of those other compounding issues that we've been dealing with. So just to reflect again on terms of the $500 million Bushfire Local Economic Recovery Fund, the 22 recovery officers, the recovery support services, and the face-to-face efforts to support more than 5,000 people, families and the like, has certainly helped. And alongside of that is some of those community-led projects that we're very proud of as well, in terms of and again in the face of what came next in relation to not only the impacts of the fires itself, but as we all are aware, the ongoing severe storms and floods and the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll just make sure if someone can just tell me, because I think my slides are still a bit slow on my screen, which slide you have up there now, Kim?
Sure, Dominic. So we've got the one up there about the flood recovery.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Excellent. So not a big surprise to people in terms of New South Wales is impacted by multiple disasters, as already been mentioned. Whilst bushfire has been the most significant in recent times, the severe storms of March and April 2021 reminded us once again that it's not all just about bushfires. And so when you consider the significant impact that was occurred, one of the things we're very proud of within Resilience New South Wales is this became a true whole of government effort built upon our experiences from the bushfires, which led to rapid damage assessments of properties, immediate cleanup and assistance through the collaboration of our fire and emergency services colleagues, along with, importantly, our partners from the Australian Defence Force. We were able to very quickly stand up some of our flood help and assistance in relation to that, and in record time commence some of the funding packages, in partnership with our Commonwealth colleagues to support our primary producers and our other community members impacted by that. And so from that, as we know, and if we just go to the next slide, in terms of some of that work and that really important cleanup work was part of a whole of government coordination effort. And for the first time, we saw an immediate response, an immediate transition and a linking coordination between immediate response to the actual impact of the disaster, standing up the relief efforts that are required in things like emergency accommodation, and simultaneously starting the cleanup and getting the funding packages out with the support of our colleagues. So once again, a big thanks to our emergency services colleagues, the wonderful work of the State Emergency Service, but supported by our fire services and the Australian Defence Force. One of the other things, of course, as part of that was the efforts to establish community recovery centres across New South Wales. And so in, and I'll just remind myself, I think it was something like 22 community recovery centres were up and running at one point in time to help, relief centres to help personnel with evacuation, which came down to then to 8 recovery centres established from the Sydney Basin all the way up the mid-north coast and into the north coast to support those areas. And whilst it's fortunate in some ways, it's unfortunate in others that we're all able to very much utilise our experienced personnel from the fire operations to expand their functions straight into supporting people in the recovery systems. But of course, that hasn't been the last of it in terms of what New South Wales has been impacted by this year. And if we just move on again now, thanks to the next slide. Resilience New South Wales has found itself in the middle of supporting the COVID operation as well, and particularly since the Delta variant of the COVID-19 virus has impacted on the state. So very much from the early days of the Delta outbreak, Resilience New South Wales has always had a support and relief role, well, since the beginning of COVID, to be honest, to support people that have been forced into isolation under the public health orders, to make sure that where possible we can provide food relief to those people that don't have the means to do so. And that became very significant as we started working in southwestern Sydney. The lockdown made a tremendous impact, as you would be aware, on many people that are refugees, people that work in many of the in the economic areas that suffered immediately in terms of hospitality, Uber drivers, transport drivers, and those sort of things, as were impacted by the lockdown. And so we had to very much put in place whole of government support efforts in partnership with many of our charity partners, such as Food Bank and OzHarvest. And again, with the support of our emergency services personnel to help with that delivery as well. And in many ways, that's now seen as one of the significant things that did support the people of Southwest Sydney. More importantly, as part of that process, was once again ongoing partnerships with our local government colleagues that also allowed significant work to be done to support food and transport. One of the more telling stories was, you probably saw in that earlier image, the semi-trailer parked at the front of that building at Wilcannia. We made sure that from the very early days of the COVID outbreak in Western New South Wales, we established what we call the Regional Isolation Care Package, which recognised many of our isolated communities in that part don't have the means to get other food to them. Click and delivery, as you would have seen, into places like Wilcannia, is not as easy as it is for most of us. So we're very proud of the work we're able to do to support our Aboriginal communities in things like that from the early days of that particular outbreak. And then moving on, the response, we've also partnered not only with our food charities and the like, but also worked very hard behind the scenes in terms of collaborating across government in support of getting grants out to many of our people that need assistance, whether they be in Aboriginal communities, refugees, people from non-English speaking backgrounds and the like, to make sure that they can be supported through those particularly tough times. And it's very pleasing to say that much of that has passed us. And if we can just go forward then to that, I think there's a summary slide of some of the COVID response and some of the numbers that Resilience New South Wales, working alongside our colleagues, as Commissioner Rogers put up before, the RFS has been significant, but we've seen it's been a partnership that's delivered more in an overall more than 3,400 tonnes of goods. In other words, about 80 fully loaded semi-trailers to get to people that in need through some of those things. Excuse me. And so we're continuing to work part of that. And as you would be all aware, under the current COVID operations, whilst New South Wales has done a tremendous job in relation to getting our vaccination rates and reducing the numbers, outbreaks still occur. And some of our more vulnerable people, particularly in remote and isolated parts of New South Wales, continue to be impacted by the COVID response. And so to this day, in places like, and if we can just move forward, I think there's a really good slide of the Toomala basketball stadium where we work very closely with some of our remote Aboriginal communities on that. So if we can just take up to slide 32 there, thanks Kim. In relation to the role of Resilience New South Wales, it's beyond just bushfire, it's beyond just recovery. It's a very broad remit we've been given. So after these acute disasters, we have had the opportunity to set and reflect. It's, as I said at the start of this presentation, it's why Resilience New South Wales was born. We are working to transform the whole of government approach to disaster management in New South Wales, and our vision is to create resilient communities across the state and play an assurance role to government about the resilience of those communities. And so whether it's in relation to some of the work in relation to bushfire risk that's already been mentioned, the significant work that we need to do in terms of flood and storm risk ongoing, but also some of those other things in relation to the challenges of critical infrastructure, the ongoing threat of cybersecurity. And some of those things that we don't often think about on a daily basis that have really been borne out by some of the issues we've dealt with through the pandemic, pause us to reflect and continue to improve. And our job is to continue to, through that strategy, one of our key elements is supporting local capability. So very much with the establishment of Resilience New South Wales, we have for the first time our local coordination and service delivery team in many parts of regional New South Wales, as well as the Sydney Basin, who can provide support to local government in emergency management planning, impact assessment, and recovery services, and work alongside our response partners, the uniformed agencies in helping affected communities. So we're drawing together this unified resilience, and I think I've been very fortunate to personally see that through some of the work that has been done as part of the COVID response, and some of the lessons we're learning from that we continue to grow with, and I'm very confident we'll see continue to expand in New South Wales. Our strategy also, though, means that we're looking to install statewide confidence in resilience with a clear focus on planning and coordination and partnership efforts, particularly with our Commonwealth colleagues. Our intent is to continue to work towards the development of a state resilience strategy, and more of that will be shared early in the new year as we start to commence the more detailed discussions about what we think that looks like in terms of providing, how do we support our local communities, how do we provide assurance to government, and how do we continue to partner across all of our sectors. And so the lessons we're learning, the success we're delivering against at this state, continue to help grow that. So one of the key things the government expects of us is that we do continue that coordinated approach, and we're acting in a joined up way, not only just across government, but as we saw during the recovery efforts, the work with the corporate sector, for example, with Lang O'Rourke and the other local subcontractors for the cleanup of those 3,600 properties has made sure as a government we continue to develop and improve on those processes. When it comes to our accommodation pods, the work that we've done with the Minderoo Foundation, as well as the Salvation Army and the Australian Red Cross, to get those pods out and available, those 210 pods to help people. The continued work we do in partnership with our Fire and Emergency Services, but also more than ever with the Australian Defence Force, who became a key partner again during the COVID response operations. And the work we want to do with all planning and development areas in relation to our efforts to continue to improve our planning and development controls across the state, and the work that we can do to support that. We have a remit to develop that integrated view of the statewide risk and vulnerability, and we continue to work with identifying the resilience priorities across the state to do that. So over the coming year, you will see additional investment into risk reduction grants programs, and please keep an eye out for that. You will see the expansion of the disaster preparedness programs across our regional areas, and you'll also see, which we're very proud of, our approach to enhancing capacity by additional training and online support to people not only in the fire and emergency services sector, but across our local government and other community partners. We continue to work very closely with the charity and not-for-profit sector, and the wonderful work that's been done with some of the food charities, as well as our traditional partners such as the Australian Red Cross and the Salvation Army and Anglicare and St Vincent de Paul and many others. We want to continue to grow because it sits very alongside the heart of resilience in relation to the work we can do as an empowered community. So we're continuing to work through what's been a very challenging time, but very proud of the fact that we are on the rebound in many ways as a state. And as I said, by taking the community at the heart approach, which we did through the COVID example, and what we've done through the recovery efforts, we certainly intend to make sure that we are able to build and grow as a state. And with that, I think I better leave it for there, because Kim, very keen to have an ongoing discussion with questions people have about the role of Resilience New South Wales and the way forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominic. We really appreciate it. So if anybody has any questions in regards to Resilience New South Wales and what they're doing in this space and how everything is interacted and interlined together to help support you, please pop them in the Q&A or in the chat. There is one in there at the moment, Dominic. I'll just open this up for you. So we've been asked, how is funding being provided for resilient community projects, and what is the process and selection criteria?
I'll just make sure I'm off mute. There are a number of different programs we are working on in relation to that. The most significant, and I mean, there's been some work underway already in relation to the recent flood events, and so there'll be some more work for those impacted communities that come from that coming forward. But the most significant one is that one I mentioned towards the end in relation to our partnership with the Commonwealth in terms of the National Risk Reduction Strategy. And that will be the best way that people can access money. There will be statewide programs, but there will also be significant funding available for community programs through that. And what we're looking for is key programs that go towards risk analysis, risk understanding, how we can share information in relation to it, and obviously also positive programs that may indeed reduce, say, bushfire risk, storm risk, and the like within communities.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dominic. What we're going to do now, so if people want to pop any more questions in there, just to support Dominic, as in the delivery that he's just provided, we're going to get Corinne to show you a little bit more about the CRO program and how that works and how that supports our community. So if anybody else has further questions, if they could pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we can come back to them after Corinne has provided her demonstration. Corinne, we've got no sound from your end.
Sorry, we're on mute now. So just talking about the Community Recovery Officer program and what it is. So New South Wales Community Recovery Officers were positioned across 22 fire-affected LGAs in New South Wales to support communities throughout recovery. So Dominic just touched on this just earlier. The Wingecarribee and Wallandilly CRO program are managed by Council, funded by Resilience New South Wales, and they're responsible for the development of a range of recovery initiatives alongside community groups and stakeholders. So we have a few key deliverables here under the CRO program, and that ensures that community recovery needs are understood, that individuals have access to important information, that there is community input into important recovery plans and documents which shape recovery activities in their local area. And it also supports a statewide program framework across New South Wales while being adaptable to local approaches to recovery. And so you'll notice that in these, in each LGAs, they'll have site-specific needs of each community. So Wallandilly and Wingecarribee, although we're side by side, our communities vary different in terms of the people on the ground, the infrastructure that may or may not be available in those communities, and what is represented there. So the CRO facilitated some community recovery workshops in 2020 for both the southern and northern villages of the Wingecarribee. The purpose of these workshops were for residents actually to collectively identify the immediate recovery needs for their community. So what we do and continue to do is keep these workshops going and keep our online communications open with communities. We work very closely with them on the ground throughout our roles. And some of the key themes that were identified for our southern and northern villages specifically, they asked for community connection. They were talking about community resilience, mental health and wellbeing support, preparedness and hazard reduction, firefighting infrastructure, telecommunications and support for rebuilding, housing support, natural environment, economic recovery, and insurance and financial aid. Now, council won't be the lead agency in most of these, but it was really important to collate what community were identifying as needs for their recovery. And so we were then able to give that information back to community, who are the lead agencies, what council is responsible for. We do have a response document from council that shows what we are doing in this space and what we continue to do. And that is available on our community bushfire webpage for those that you would like to go through that. It's quite an extensive document and I won't go through that today. So also with community recovery, we do have a lot of programs and events. So using those themes that are continually identified by community, council delivers a range of programs to assist in recovery. Council has been committed to prioritising infrastructure projects, economic schemes, and have helped our bushfire impacted communities. Council has implemented many environmental initiatives to help our landscape recovery in a range of social connection events and activities to bring our communities even closer together. So Council's community recovery team has delivered a range of recovery events and programs, and these have been funded through the CRO program and other grant funding opportunities. So some of them we had were forest bathing and canoeing to allow residents to connect back to nature, drive-in movies and a community recovery concert, which is probably one of the largest events Wingecarribee seen in many years. It was really great to be out on the ground there too, because we had a whole of community. We understand that the northern and southern villages, yes, were indeed impacted, but also there was a need post-COVID-19 of a lot of reconnection across the Shire. So coming together and sort of celebrating the good times and recreating memories was key for that. It was really good to see some of the feedback from that. Was we actually created a space unintentionally for those bushfire impacted residents to tell their stories and share those stories to those that weren't significantly impacted and just bring that community cohesion and support through that. We also did Regrow Wingecarribee, so you can see some public school students there on the screen, a school planting project. So we went out to a number of fire impacted schools earlier this year and repotted over 2,000 tube stock. So that all the schools now are looking after them in their schools, so that they're developing programs about environmental needs and responding to that in their communities. So we'll host a number of events beginning of next year where the students will get to distribute that out to their communities. So it's just that sense of belonging in there as well for them. We held some Writing for Wellbeing workshops, photo voice. We've got a Renewal and Resilience book launch and Stories to Heal Us. So just a few health and wellbeing programs there too for community. Council also did a bushfire community recovery and resilience small grants program. So touching on the question that we had up before, I'd noticed that you did mention about where can we get grants from? Many different places. Where can you get funding from? Many different places. It is you do have to keep an eye out for them. We're largely across what's available, so you can always reach out to council. We can assist if there's any community related ones for community to be able to participate in and apply for. We will communicate that out. But in this particular case, we just use some statewide funding to then put that funds into community. So some of the really exciting applications and community groups that applied to this was the men's table. So Wingecarribee Resilient Communities of Men, the Garden of Memories, which is the one that you can see on the screen there, down at Bundanoon. They just wanted to get together as a community again and just replant some of the trees just to commemorate the Black Summer bushfires. Gather, Connect, Reflection and Healing through Songs. That's Southern Tablelands Arts. Some of the songs that the kids are doing now through that are quite incredible, yet to be released. Balmoral Basketball Buddies, and just a couple of other ones there. So Stories Towards Recovery and Fostering a Strong Resilience Community. So down at Bundanoon again there. Immediately after the fires, Council established the Wingecarribee Social Recovery Subcommittee. So this is still running 2 years on. We meet monthly. There's 25 active members of the subcommittee. So representations from local, state and federal government agencies, which is exciting, as well as community groups and community representations from bushfire impacted villages. The agencies represented locally there are also Anglicare, the Red Cross, Department of Education, Salvation Army, St Vincent de Paul, Rural Financial Counselling and Habitat for Humanity. So it's a really great group that we get together. We sort of pinpoint what's happening out there in community and work with our residents and feedback into that committee there. and we can work out what the needs are, identify any gaps, and move forward in recovery through that. So when we do go out to community did tell us that they would like a clear plan for recovery that is community owned, and council's also heard a desire to have more opportunity for community input. So working groups told us that we're people in community who are ready to contribute. Council heard an interest in developing mentors who can help their communities in preparing and recovering from future disasters. So what we are doing now is we are seeking to establish a community reference group as part of a broader community resilience network. And this group will be involved in a two-way information exchange between council community about information management, disaster preparedness and recovery. If you would like to be a part of that, please head over to council's website. It's going to be very exciting 2022. We're also looking at ways to supporting community develop their own recovery and resilience plans. So projects in the Wingecarribee, council working on projects that foster disaster mentors, harnessing the learnings from our community members and providing opportunity for peer support program. So it is really exciting that even in the midst of recovery, there are people in community who are ready to stand up and pass the baton and use what they've learned throughout this experience to help and foster other mentors, which is really great. So there's also multiple projects that have been recently announced under the recent Bushfire Community Recovery and Resilience Fund, so Stream 2, that cover the Wingecarribee. So these are statewide projects that have tapped into our communities, which is really exciting. There's plenty that are across Wollondilly as well, so it's really exciting to see them start rolling out in 2022. So council will assist these projects to liaise with our communities as the projects begin to roll out. And we're excited to be working in partnership with Bega Valley Shire Council and our joint community resilience program of events there too. So to find out more of what's happening in this space, Wingecarribee and across Wollondilly, you can head to the council's community resilience page there. Just showing you a quick thing. So we've had up for the last 6 months a disaster dashboard. This is a really good one-stop shop for everything that's happening in terms of any incidents of COVID-19, fire incidents, road conditions. It really is a plethora of information there. Natalie touched on it yesterday in good detail, so I won't go too much into that. So just here's a list of contacts. We'll have this up on the screen. So council has always had our bushfire recovery hotline, so dial in there. We've got community customer service officers there that are trained in having a chat with you and taking their time with you and getting you that right information. And of course, you can always reach out to me directly. My contact details are there and on the website. If you are in the midst of recovery still, which we understand most are, bushfire community recovery, we've got a web page there on our website. And then also moving into community resilience as well, because we do realise that there are parts of the Shire that are recovering, but there are parts of the Shire as well that are ready for preparedness and community resilience programs. So that will happen soon. So it's a little bit about what we're doing here. Thank you for your time. And I'll pass back over to Kim. Thanks, Kim.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Corinne. So we've got a couple of questions. So it's probably based at yourself, Dominic. So I'll read these out to you. So the first one, does Resilience New South Wales have a list of risk by LGAs across by type and classification? For example, bushfire, landslide, informational data, seasonal exposures to assist council in their planning, preparing and managing their risks.
No, thanks very much, Kim, for the question. I think hopefully I'm not talking over the top of you. My video's got a bit of a delay. Look, in terms of risk analysis at a state level, most of our work at this stage has been hazard-based in relation to understanding, what do we face as a state. Some of those things I put up before in relation to whether it's bushfires, floods, cybersecurity, counter-terrorism threats, other natural hazards, the pandemic itself, etc., etc. There is more work to be done at the local level in relation to unpacking that, depending on the risk. As you may or may not be aware, through the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, significant work has been done in relation to mapping bushfire risk and better for the purposes of planning, fire trail works, hazard reduction priorities, and of course, ongoing response efforts. However, it's fair to say that that's not as comprehensive across other hazards. So we are very keen to work alongside our partners within government, such as Department of Planning, Regional New South Wales, and others in relation to things like improved local understanding in relation to things like flood risk and other risks, sometimes quite unique, but obvious in some areas when you look at somewhere like the Illawarra in relation to things like landslip, to better do that. And that's very much why, and just following on from Corinne's discussion there about how when that money starts to go out the door and we notify people, we are very keen under our risk reduction framework to get a more localised understanding of risk and then help use that to help fund our investment priorities and improve across the state.
Fantastic, thanks Dominic. Another question we've got here, which came in from community. What does Resilience New South Wales have in place to support the community with the current recovery support service due to finish at the end of December this year, considering that research shows recovery can take up to 10 years?
Again, another really good question and something that's very much on our mind. We will continue to work with the options around that. And of course, we've already been able, as I mentioned before, already been able to extend some services. We do know, and the question is very correct in relation to the long-term impact. But again, it also goes back to some of the work we are doing within Resilience New South Wales. The fact that we've now been able to stand up an agency of permanent staff that do have responsibilities in terms of local coordination and service delivery across New South Wales means that we'll have a much more latent capacity to support our communities for the next decade. The government, and certainly Commissioner Fitzsimmons, doesn't want to be in a position where we have to keep going back year after year to fund grant monies to support some of these programs. So there will always be needed for specific recovery support services in mental health or specific needs in relation to accommodation or business recovery and the like. But through the new way forward within Resilience New South Wales, we really want to move away from that traditional model of you wait till you have a disaster, then you work out where you get some funding from, and then you start to fund the funding services for a year or two and then walk away again. The whole model of Resilience New South Wales means that we intend to very much make sure that those focus on priority is over the longer term. Of course, depending on the scale of the disaster, there will always be a need to expand those services as we're currently doing and as we saw with the Mid-North Coast floods to meet those needs. But we want to have a more sustainable model for that going forward. And the recruitment of our new staff into the agency is still only just finalising. We've done most of the recruitment round and most of the people are now in place. But of course, now their role is to get out and about and work alongside our other community partners in recovery support functions.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So if anybody else has any further questions, what we might do is we might take those on notice and we can always email them through to Dominic at Resilience and get some further clarification on that. Everything will be available on both the council websites. So just want to thank Dominic very much for his time today. Very much appreciate you stepping in at the last minute. So thank you so much, Dominic.
Well, thanks. Thanks very much, Kim, again. And thanks very much to all the conference organisers. And I wish you well with the rest of your day and hopefully really looking forward to hearing reports back in terms of the feedback and where we can continue to support our local communities, particularly those that have been so significantly impacted over the last couple of years. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Dominic.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay.
So we'll just move on now. We have a presentation just to show before our next guest speaker. So this presentation has been provided by RRT, which are called Rapid Relief Team. So some of you may be aware of this organisation, some may not. So Rapid Relief Team delivers hope and relief to people across the globe, whether it be fire, flood, or humanitarian need. They have expanded their support services to meet the needs of the that is required at the time of the disaster. So they support in emergency and disaster relief, youth, health and disability, and homelessness. We do have a current video that we are going to show at the moment, and this is around their fire relief. So what they have implemented is a rapid water system. So we'll share that video with you now.
We've been engaged with helping the rural fire services over a number of years, and what we've noticed with the drought, the water's drying up. So coupled with fighting the fires, they're running out of water. So we put together our team, a team of volunteers from RRT, and we've designed and engineered a rapid water system. It's a mobile plant that we can deploy very quickly. Within 2 hours of finding inaccessible water source, we can move in to bring that inaccessible water close to the front line where the fire tankers can access the water, refill quickly so they can get back out in the front line and protect the assets, houses and what have you.
The situation here today is we've got a fire behind us coming through the hills. The fire's less than 5 kilometres away. We've got RFS tankers protecting houses. There's a serious lack of water to refill their trucks. Yeah, the water source that we've come across here is inaccessible, and so we've pumped out of that. We've drafted out of that Blue Lagoon, and we've pumped it nearly 2 kilometres here to this tank, which is 75,000 litres. We filled in 12 minutes. We can actually probably even get that down to 10 minutes. We're still trialling the equipment. We can fill 4 trucks at a time here, plus a bulk water tanker. Obviously we don't want to waste water, so we've actually filled the farmer's dam here. His drought-stricken cattle. So we've got our overflow, anything we spill goes straight back into his dam.
So this system has been engineered to provide over 100 litres a second into this 70,000 litre storage tank behind us here. And then from this 70,000 litre tank, we can fill into these water carts at 150 litres per second. So we can fill these small mobile firefighting equipment, we can fill them in just over a minute. A fully automatic system which I can start from a fob in my hand. The pumps are positioned nearly 2 kilometres away, so we can move water fast. We can get water from difficult locations right up close to where the firefighters need it, and we can bring the trucks into this location easily where they can top up fast. They don't have to go through difficult terrain to access the water. They can pull in here, load fast and be back on the fire front in a few moments.
Makes a big difference, especially out here, Central West. Water's a bit scarce at the moment, so lucky to find a water supply here. If there's no reticulated water in the area, they're having this kind of system where they drag water from some distance away. Yeah, we appreciate the help. But yeah, for the active firefighting teams, they'll go through tank after tank throughout the whole day. So tens of thousands of litres really. Generally about 5 to 6 minutes to fill. Here, you probably get that back down about 2.5. Yeah, no, it's a great help.
We see the rapid water system is something that's scalable. We'd like to think we could set this up and have it in strategic locations throughout New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria, so that these rapid water systems can be deployed quickly when there's an emergency and lack of water to fight the fire.
Thank you for sharing that video, Kim. Rapid Relief Team are a fairly new organisation, or maybe not super new to Wollondilly, but not very well known yet, and certainly making more of a presence here all the time. But we have a very active Rapid Relief Team in Wollondilly who've provided some amazing support through us for the area since the fires. So they've supported some of our community events and our memorial events that we've done since the fires, and even recently when we had residents stranded in the Burragorang Valley in Urandri after the flood event earlier this year, they provided food hampers for us to airlift out So that was a great partnership with the SES, the RFS and the Rapid Relief team to provide support to those residents who were stranded for a couple of weeks in the Burrowgrang Valley. They've also been providing food hampers through some of our community organisations like Warragamba Silverdale Neighbourhood Centre and Community Links Wellbeing, providing food hampers to those who have been impacted by the COVID-19 lockdown and pandemic. So a huge thanks to the Rapid Relief team and their ongoing presence. They've got a presence in Southern Highlands, Wollondilly and across the Macarthur. So it's a group I think that we'll all be seeing a lot more of and who play a really valuable role in this resilience space and the response phase too when an emergency does happen. Also just want to quickly share, so there was a question before around some of the ways that people can find out what disasters that they might be, their area where they live might be prone to. Just want to quickly share the Get Ready Wollondilly website as well. So this is a website that was put together with some funding from the CRO and in partnership with the Corinne Council. So just going to quickly share this. So it's called Climate Wise Communities Funding that allowed us to develop this website, but it's a really great tool that residents of Wollondilly can jump on to help them get better prepared for the different types of disaster that their area might be prone to. So it also talks about some of the different workshops that might be up and coming as well. We're hoping to run more workshops next year once we are fully out of lockdown and we can run events unrestricted again. But this is a really great tool that I don't think is super well known across the community that people can use to look at what types of disasters they might be prone to in their area of Wollondilly. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much. Now, I'm not sure if this is something you and Corinne can answer or whether it's something we've got to take back to Dominic. There is a question in the Q&A. So is it true that Resilience New South Wales are paying for rebuilds of residents who have no insurance? Someone has been made aware of a family who would appear to be, this would be happening for. Other residents are distressed. How do other residents who are in the same place access this service? Is this something that you could be able to answer? Or is this something we would have to take back to Dominic? I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, look, I don't know. We'd have to have a look into that one and just get a more structured answer from Resilience New South Wales. I don't know where we stand and discuss about that, but definitely look into it for you. If you'd like to provide us your contact details, we can provide that answer to you personally if you'd like. So that would be great. If you could pop that into the chat or direct messages, that'd be great.
And so what we'll do if there's anybody who's wants to get in contact with either Natalie, Corinne or myself, we'll put our individual details in the chat. So if you don't feel that you want to put your details in the chat, that's fine. You can actually then come through one of us and we can look into that for you. That's no problem at all. So moving along now, I'd like to welcome Alexandra. So Alexandra is from Legal Aid and Alex will be talking to you today around a few different aspects, in particular identifying common legal issues that arise after a disaster, including insurance, tenancy, financial hardships, grants and financial support, employment, neighbour issues, discussing when legal issues may arise after a disaster and how a lawyer can help, how to access legal help both immediately and in the long-term recovery. Alex is the Senior Solicitor for Disaster Response Legal Services with Legal Aid New South Wales. Alex has over 6 years' experience working in disaster-related legal services, including attending disaster recovery centres and providing legal advice and casework assistance to persons affected by natural disasters. She specialises in insurance, consumer and financial hardship legal issues. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks very much, Kim. I'm just going to share my screen now. Please let me know if that is coming up.
Yes, all good, Alex.
Perfect. Great. Well, we'll kick off. Thanks very much for that introduction, Kim. I'd just like to also acknowledge that I'm presenting today from Gadigal land and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander persons listening today. So as Kim said, I'm a solicitor at Legal Aid New South Wales. I work in the disaster response legal service that sits within Legal Aid New South Wales. And our service specialises in giving legal advice to people who have experienced a disaster. As Kim said, I've worked in this space for a couple of years now, providing advice for people that have experienced a disaster all over the state. So that includes, most recently, floods up on the mid-north coast and in the Hawkesbury area, but also certainly we did a lot of work after the 2019-2020 bushfires and continue to assist people with legal issues after the fires to this day. So this morning, I really just wanted to discuss two kind of key issues. The first being what types of legal issues actually come out of a disaster. And so we'll be discussing in a little bit more detail things like insurance law, tenancy law, and financial hardship. And then I also wanted to hopefully, explain a bit about how a lawyer can actually assist with these issues and how to access legal help if you need it after a disaster. And, I'll probably be speaking about 20 minutes this morning, and hopefully we'll have some time for some questions if anyone has any afterwards. So just a little bit about what the disaster response legal service is. So as I said, the disaster response legal service, it sits within Legal Aid New South Wales, and we specialise in giving legal advice to people who are affected by a disaster. So that could be a bushfire, a flood, a storm, or any other extreme weather event. We are a free service, which means that anyone who's experiencing legal issues that's been affected by a disaster can contact us for free legal advice. We also partner with the legal assistance sector to provide these services. So that includes organisations like local community legal centres, who are the locals on the ground. We also partner with pro bono partners like Justice Connect and the Law Society of New South Wales. And the goal with this is that together with these organisations, we aim to help as many people as possible with as many issues as possible. So sometimes there's areas of law that we don't specialise in or we don't have the expertise in, but that's okay. That's why we partner with these organisations, so that if somebody comes through to us with a legal issue that we're not able to assist with fully, we always try to use those connections to refer them to the right place so that they can get that legal advice that they need. And we also try to help in a trauma-informed way. So we know that after experiencing a disaster, that throws a range of issues at people, and that makes, sometimes navigating what would otherwise be a pretty simple task for people really difficult. So we just try to bring that understanding to our work and help people in the way that best suits their needs at that time. How do we actually provide this legal help? So first and foremost, what we do is give legal advice and in some instances, ongoing legal representation to people who have a legal issue after a disaster. Initially, we provide that advice at disaster recovery centres when they're established. So we're sitting in there with other agencies and can provide that legal advice face-to-face with people in that sort of immediate sense after a disaster. And we also, go on outreach to communities that have been affected when there's, community expos and other opportunities for us to meet with people face-to-face and give advice. We also have our helpline, which is operational still to this day, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Anyone can call through to that number. It gets triaged, and then your call will get transferred to Legal Aid New South Wales, and you'll be put in contact with a lawyer like myself and my colleagues to be able to give people sort of direct legal advice about the issues they're facing. So as I said, that line is still operational now and available for anyone to call through to if they want to access legal help that way through the phone. And another big part of the work that we do is what we call community legal education. So we go to community meetings, do legal education talks like the one I'm doing this morning, podcasts, and other events to provide information to community and community workers about these legal issues that they might be experiencing. And we also have a lot of publications and fact sheets designed for people to be able to, read those resources and self-help or get some more information about their situation if they so choose. So all those resources are available on our website, which is the address is on the screen now. Okay, so talked about what the Disaster Response Legal Service is. And now I just wanted to talk a bit more about some of the legal issues that you might experience after a disaster and how a lawyer can actually help with those. So I know that when we're talking about the recovery journey, lawyers and legal help, that's probably not the first thing that springs to mind for most people, and that's understandable. But we know that there's a lot of issues that people encounter when they're on that recovery journey. And often many of those issues are actually legal issues where people have rights around those points. And, that's not always immediately apparent to people that this is actually a legal issue that they're experiencing and that they can actually get some legal advice about that. So I guess the goal of today's talk is to just flag some of these issues that might actually be legal issues and hopefully sort of jog in people's minds that that's something that they could get some legal advice about and get in contact with us. So these issues are also, hopefully quite general in nature, that they're issues that people experience, not just for fires, but also in floods or storm events. And depending on, where you are in your recovery process, some of these issues might not be as apparent now, but certainly for future disasters, if they occur, this is also really good information to keep in mind about, the help that might be out there if you need to access it. So the first legal issue that I wanted to chat about today is insurance. I would say insurance is by far and large the biggest legal issue that we advise people on after a disaster. And we can really give advice to people throughout that whole claims process journey and issues that they might encounter with their insurance. So, firstly, at the very immediate stages, it might be that people just need help accessing their key insurance documents. That's not usually something that you always have access to if you've had to evacuate or your home's been destroyed or damaged. So we can, direct them and help them gain access to those documents. Equally, sometimes people don't know who their insurance is with, and we can also direct them to help them find who their insurance policy is with at that initial stage. After we have access to those documents, we can help people understand what they're actually covered for under their policy. And that's not just what weather events they're covered for, so whether they're covered for a fire or a flood or not, but also, and probably most importantly, it's also helping people understand what additional benefits they might actually be entitled to under their policy. So that's things like temporary accommodation coverage, debris removal coverage, food spoilage, and emergency payments. Often some of these benefits, depending on which policy you have, they're benefits that are paid in addition to their sum insured, which means they're actually amounts on top of their sum insured that they may be able to claim. So it's helping people understand what actual benefits they're covered for under that policy, and then helping them also, sometimes get in contact with the insurer and make claims for those benefits if they haven't already done so. We can also give people advice on the timeframes that insurers, have to adhere to in the claims process, and also their obligations to communicate with people and the timeframes that they're obliged to do that. And that can sometimes just give people a bit more understanding about what to expect for that claims process in terms of timeframes and communication with their insurer. We can also talk to people about their options if they're at the stage of settling their claim, and talk to them about the difference between, cash settlements and the insurer managing repairs or rebuilds. So when people are making those decisions, they are big decisions to make, and getting advice about what their options might be in that circumstance and really understanding those options and being able to weigh them up can be of real assistance. Equally, it may be that some people just need advice on actually understanding what settlement it is that they've received. So in some circumstances, people know they've made a claim, they've got a sum of money in their bank account, but they don't really actually understand what that was for and what that covered. We can help get them that information and go through that with them so they can really understand, what that settlement was that they reached with the insurer. We also know, as has been said this morning and throughout the conference, that the recovery journey is long, and people, some people are very much still in the process of rebuilding now, even 2 years on. For people that are having their rebuild managed by their insurer, we can also give advice to them about what to do if things are going wrong in that rebuild process. So actually, under the General Insurance Code of Practice, if an insurer is managing that rebuild or repairs, they actually have to guarantee the quality of that work. So that means that, you might have rights with your insurer if things are going wrong, and there is onus on insurers to do something about that. So again, we can talk to people about what their rights are here and help them, in those discussions with their insurer if they need to raise those issues. And finally, we can also give people advice, and this is a big one, about the disputes and appeals process with insurance companies. So often people think if they've made a claim and it's been refused or even refused in part, that's the end of the story and there's not much that they can do about that. Every policy has the right to have a decision from the insurer reviewed. So that means that, if you think that decision was incorrect or unfair in some way, you do have the right to ask the insurer to review that decision. And then also, if you're still unhappy with that response, you do have the right to have that decision appealed to the Ombudsman Service, known as AFCA. So we can certainly give people advice about what this process is, how to lodge an appeal, but also go through their situation with them and help them understand about whether that's a worthwhile process that, that they might want to go through in their circumstances. And obviously in some cases too, we can represent people through that process where required. And we can, even where in situations where people have settled their matter and they think that there's not much further that can be done, in some circumstances, you are able to go back to the insurer and ask them to review certain parts of the decision, depending on, the timeframes and where you're at to in that claims journey. So we hope that the take-home message from this little spiel about insurance is that no matter where you are on that claims process, if something feels unfair or you weren't sure about something or you just wanted some further information or advice about your insurance claim, it costs nothing to give us a call and we can chat through what your options might be with you and give you some more specific advice about your situation. So another really big legal issue that arises after disasters is housing or tenancy law. So tenancy issues come up for people who are in rental accommodation that might have been damaged or destroyed in a disaster. And that's likely to throw up a range of legal issues for people. It may be that those people have questions about, do they still need to pay their rent during a period where their property's either been destroyed or damaged? Equally, it might be people having questions about how to get repairs done to their property and how to approach their landlord about that if the property's been damaged by a disaster. And also people may have questions about, ending their lease early if the property's been destroyed or damaged, and what are their rights and obligations in that situation. So we can give people advice about what the tenancy law says in their specific situation, and also advice and assistance with any dispute process that they might have to go through after a disaster. Financial hardship is another issue that is certainly present after a disaster. And again, this is something that we see not just in the immediate sense after a disaster, but also very much in that longer term recovery. Financial hardship, put simply, is where someone's having difficulty meeting their everyday expenses, like their mortgage payments or credit card payments, car loans, or any other debt that they have. If they're having trouble meeting those expenses and you've experienced a disaster, you actually do have legal rights in that situation. And, so often people, I guess, aren't quite aware of what their rights are in that situation and think that, money stress isn't necessarily a legal issue or something that they can get assistance with. But to the contrary, especially where people have experienced a disaster and, that's a contributing factor to their financial stress, you actually have the right under the credit law to ask your bank or your creditor for financial hardship assistance after you've experienced a disaster. And again, I'd reiterate, that's not just in the immediate sense, it could be even now, the compounding issues after they've experienced a disaster. If you're in financial hardship, you can also seek this assistance. So you can ask for help in a number of ways. It could be, a reduction in the amount of payments you have to make for a period of time. It could be a stop in payments for a period of time just to allow you to get back on your feet. Equally, for some debts, it might be a reduction in the amount of debt owed. And in some circumstances, it could be a waiver of that debt, depending on the size and the nature of what that debt is. So that you can ask for this assistance from a lender, and they're actually legally obligated to properly consider that request. And if they refuse that request, you also have rights to have that decision reviewed at the Ombudsman Service known as AFCA as well. It's not just banks that have these policies in place. Many utility companies also have financial hardship policies, as well as telcos or telecommunication phone companies as well. And equally, if people have fines that they're having struggle paying, there are options for dealing with those fines debts as well, either repayment plans or in some circumstances, work and development orders might be available, which are schemes to help you either participate in programs or work off fines. That might be available to people as well. We work very closely with financial counsellors who are wonderful people who are really experts in all things financial hardship. They are both, available across Australia, but certainly across New South Wales. We also have a financial counsellor dedicated in our team at the moment, working with disaster affected people. And so if you are experiencing financial hardship issues, we very much encourage you to either get in contact with a financial counsellor or get in contact with us too, and we can talk to you about what your rights are in that situation, and also help you talk to creditors as well to figure out what might be a good solution in your circumstances. So the take-home message with financial hardship isn't that to grin and bear it. There might be other options available to you. And yeah, it's very worthwhile engaging with a financial counsellor to help you work out what those options might be. Another issue that really pops up, certainly sort of in that immediate aftermath of a disaster, is employment related issues. So people might have questions about, what happens if you stood down by an employer and whether that's lawful in those circumstances. Equally, people might need to take time off work to care for a family member or friend, or in some cases to volunteer for certain agencies like the RFS or the SES. We can talk to people about what their leave entitlements are during that period after a disaster, so that they're informed and can make the correct decisions in relation to their employment. So they're just some of the legal issues we can help with. There are many others that pop up. Another one that's, very present after disasters and in the longer term recovery is issues about payments. So that can be both Centrelink payments. We can talk to people about their eligibility for those payments. And equally, we know that there are a lot of government grants that become available. And again, we can help people understand the eligibility requirements of some of those grants and give them some further advice about their eligibility and help direct them to the right places if that's an issue that they're experiencing. We can also give advice on, issues with neighbours. So a really common one that pops up, especially after fires, is fences. Whose obligation is it to fix the fence, and how do you go about, getting a fence fixed if you're having a disagreement with your neighbour about it? We can give people advice about, what the law says in those situations. Equally, replacing important documents after a disaster. I know it's a really practical one, but it's something that obviously needs to be addressed, and many government departments now have processes in place to help people replace those documents either, at a very low cost or for free. And we can help people sort of, navigate that process if they're having trouble accessing those schemes. And really sort of any other everyday legal problem that might pop up after a disaster. As I've said before, if it's not something that we have the expertise to deal with directly, we always try to refer you to the most appropriate place so that you can get that legal advice that you need after a disaster. And so very much on that point, we also have the Bushfire Legal Aid grant scheme, which is still available and probably quite relevant for your community. So that this scheme is for primary producers and small businesses who have legal issues resulting from the 2019-2020 bushfires. You can apply to this scheme, and that allows you to get a grant of money, so a pot of money, to pay a private lawyer to represent you in those matters. So they could be legal issues like fencing matters again. It could be property issues like easements over property, retail leases, contracts disputes, or business and farm insurance disputes. That this scheme is available still for people with those legal issues after the fires. And so if you want more information about the eligibility requirements or applying for that scheme to get a private lawyer to represent you in those matters, please do get in contact with us with the number on the screen, and we can talk to you a bit further about those requirements and applying for that scheme. So look, in summary, the best way to get in contact with us, if you have a legal question or you wanted to talk about your matter, even if you're not quite sure whether it is a legal issue, just get in contact with us anyway. The best way is our hotline. So that's 1-800-801-529. As I've also said, we have our website there on the screen, which has a lot of fact sheets and further information about legal issues that you might be experiencing after a disaster. So please do access that if you'd like. And yeah, hopefully today I've given you a slight insight into what are some of the legal issues that might pop up after you've experienced a disaster and how you can access legal help. We know that this recovery process is long. We just want to reiterate that we're still here. We're still available to give legal advice about any issues that you might be experiencing. And I guess the take-home message is it doesn't cost anything to get in contact, even just to check. And, at the very least, hopefully we can just give you some information about your situation. It could lead to something more. So if any questions at all, please do get in contact with us, and we're here and available and willing to help. Thanks very much. Kim, I'll throw back to you.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was a really great presentation with some really helpful and useful information for residents. We'll open the floor now to questions if anybody has any questions for Alex. Otherwise, we do have some that we've been provided with to ask today as well.
Also, we'll have Alex's fact sheets up on the web page as well, like for the expo. So if anybody needs that information, it will be easily to access.
Sure. And look, if anything pops up after the presentation, I'm more than happy to, people could send their questions through to Kim or to Natalie, Corinne, and forward them to me. More than happy to answer those later on if they come up.
So one question I did have for you, Alex, was that a number of residents across both Wollondilly and Wingecarribee have unfortunately had experience with fraudulent tradesmen following the period of the fires. So we had we've had a number of residents who've had to go through mediation processes or other processes to try and reclaim money that was paid for work that wasn't delivered. For a person experiencing a fraud situation or who suspects that they might be unfortunately been a victim of a fraud situation, how could legal aid support them through that process?
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, it's so disappointing to hear that those situations are arising, but unfortunately we know that they do. So certainly, again, as a first port of call, we really encourage those people to get in contact with us through that hotline. We can help explore with them, what their current entitlements are. It may be that, that there are issues with the way in which their insurance payout was made. We could talk to them about that. But then certainly, if there's issues with the quality of the work that's been done, we can talk to them about their rights there and perhaps refer them to a private that might be able to take action against, a building company if required. But equally, if it's a situation of fraud, again, we can talk to them about what their possible entitlements might be there, referring them to the appropriate bodies, which in some cases might be, referring them to the police to make those appropriate reports. And then, looking at their situation as a whole to see whether there are any other rights that they might be able to exercise in relation to other bodies. So it's really, a case-by-case basis, but certainly as a first port of call, we'd really encourage them to get in contact with us, and then we can work with them to find, what might be the appropriate and best referrals we can make for them to get further legal advice if there are sort of other actions that they might be able to follow through on.
Another question that has come up several times that relates a little bit to what you're talking about with fences earlier as well, and disputes around fences and replacement of fences, is around trees and trees on neighbouring properties that people might feel are a threat to replace fencing or to rebuild buildings after fires. Is that another matter that people can seek advice from legal aid about?
Yeah, certainly. So tree issues, equally, we know that they pop up a lot as well, and we can certainly give them that general information about what the law says in their situation, and talk to them about what are the appropriate dispute processes that they can go through with their neighbour if it's at that stage where they need to start taking those next steps. So we can certainly give them advice about what the law says in their specific situation.
Thank you so much, Alex. That's great. Some lovely feedback in the chat from Kerry about the presentation. Well, thank you so much, Alex. If we get any further questions, we'll definitely be in touch. And thank you for providing your information. I think that's invaluable. So not only for our residents who've been impacted by the fires and the floods that we've had, but also our recent storm event. So if anyone who's listening today was impacted by our recent storm event in Thirlmere and is looking for some assistance as well, legal aid could be a really great contact for that situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, we very much want to reiterate, it's not just fire focus, it's any disaster issues that you might be experiencing. So yeah, please do get in contact if you have any issues at all. We'd love to hear from people.
That's great. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Okay, I would now like to welcome Liam Walter from Insurance Council of Australia. Liam joined the Insurance Council of Australia in October 2020, providing operational support for catastrophe response, and was appointed Senior Advisor, Mitigation and Catastrophe Management in August 2021. Liam has over 18 years in insurance claims management and insurance catastrophe response experience and leadership dating back to Tropical Cyclone Larry in 2006. Liam brings an interesting perspective to insurance catastrophe response, having been personally impacted by the Brisbane flood in 2011. I'd like to welcome Liam, our next speaker. Thank you, Liam.
G'day. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Excellent. Terrific. Just let me share my screen. Everyone got that? Or not yet?
Yep, we can see that now. Thank you, Liam.
Excellent. G'day, everyone. Thanks so much for joining everyone today. Just a couple of things. First off, a really excellent presentation from Alexandra there from Legal Aid. Legal Aid provides such a critical service to community, especially you know, on the back of events, and certainly you know, all of the information that Alexandra provided in relation to insurance is bang on the money, and you know, I certainly support what Legal Aid does, or we certainly support what Legal Aid does, you know, for communities. Also, and I'm very mindful, you know, the timing of this event, in fact, you know, falls right at a time when, you know, your community has been quite significantly impacted by some very severe weather, and I've had the pleasure of dealing with a number of folks from the Wollondilly Shire Council, and it really has been a pleasure, and it's you know, really terrific to see folks that are, you know, so dedicated to helping out their community. My presentation today is I pivoted a little bit given the recent severe event, and I imagine there's quite a few questions in amongst the community and uncertainty. So I'd like to dedicate as much time you know, as I can to fielding, you know, those questions and providing answers as far as I'm able. But some of the content I think is still really important. So I'll whip through that. So I just want to give a brief overview on, you know, what the Insurance Council is. I want to talk about the events of the last couple of years and you know, put some numbers around the cost and impact of those events. I'll talk a little bit about risk and insurance in the context of resilience, or a concept of resilience that I'd like to talk with you about, and then sort of, you know, pivot a little bit more into some information, you know, relevant to where many of you are at the moment, having you know, experienced some pretty significant losses. I'll talk through the claim process. I'll talk through some issues, unfortunately, that are playing out related to COVID-19, and then happy then to really get down into the detail of things and understand how things are going and how you're moving forward through from the severe weather recently. So the Insurance Council is the representative body for the general insurance industry of Australia. So all of the insurers that you'll be dealing with at the moment, or the vast majority of those insurers are members of the Insurance Council, and we represent them on a range of fronts. One is, you know, at events such as this, we provide operational support and coordination during significant weather events as well. And we believe an insurable Australia is a resilient Australia, and it's our purpose to be the voice for a resilient Australia. This purpose, articulated in this way, has really been solidified in the last sort of 12 to 24 months, and a significant portion of the advocacy, which is you know, really important function of the ICA, is focused around resilience related initiatives, mitigation related initiatives, and climate change related initiatives. So I just wanted to, I guess, give everyone a sense of the scale of natural disasters, nationally. I know you've been impacted locally, but there's any number of communities that are impacted by significant events at any given time. And over the last 2 and a bit years, since 2018, there's been more than 9 billion. I know it says greater than 8.9 billion, but it's greater than $9 billion in damage covered by an insurance. Annually, the cost of events is estimated at around $18 billion. So that takes into account all events that occur and follow-on impacts, not just the sort of direct property damage impacts. That $18 billion is expected to actually double into the next decade, and then in fact double again beyond that to 2050. It's a huge drain, frankly, on the economy, our society, our communities, and this ties into the advocacy work that we do around resilience and mitigation, that these sorts of losses nationally aren't sustainable, and that there's work that we can all do, at the federal government level, at the state government level, at the local government level, and as individuals, to uplift our resilience, mitigate against these events, so that we don't have to deal with the ongoing impacts. So risk and insurance now. So I guess this was, the crux of what I wanted to talk to everyone about, and it's really important for you to know your risks. So I put that in italic there. It's not just the risks, it's really knowing your individual risks. There's any number of hazards that you might be exposed to, natural hazards, of course, depending on where you live. Flooding, maybe, bushfire, cyclone, severe storms, are a hazard for anyone. And it's really important to understand what you're exposed to in that regard. Near and far is also an important thing to think of, and what I mean there is that you might be directly exposed to a flood risk, for example, but there could be hazards that aren't right on your doorstep that can create issues for you. For example, a fire risk that exists away from your property might create issues for you in terms of access to your property, or if you're a business owner, could impact your supply chain and supply and delivery routes. So it's important to not just think about those risks that are right on your doorstep, but also to think about those risks and hazards that are, maybe a little bit further away and oftentimes out of mind, but can actually quite significantly, impact you from a distance. Plan. I'm a really firm believer that a form of resilience is knowledge and planning and thinking about the risks and how you might deal with those risks, to put you really in the best place to protect what's important to you most. So how will you protect the things that are most important to you? First of all is getting informed, being informed about what your risks are. Second is around having plans in the unfortunate event that one of those risks arises, if you had to evacuate your property, where would you stay? What would you take with you? What's the route that you would take, the safest route? You know, these sorts of things. And this is sort of where insurance comes into the picture really as well, is that insurance is a tool that's available to provide, you know, financial protection in the event of one of these risks coming to pass. Another really important point, and I can't really emphasize this one enough, is, and I've put it this way for a reason: how much would it cost to start from scratch? What I mean by that is, if you think about all of your worldly possessions, and I'm talking, you know, sort of insurance here, think of all of your worldly possessions and your home. If your plot of land was just a vacant plot of land, how much would it cost to put it back to where it was? And I think this is a space where there is a risk of significantly underestimating those costs. The costs to replace your home, for example, is not the valuation of the home. It's the cost to, in the event of a disaster, potentially remove all of the debris, remove the damaged elements of the buildings that might be on the site from the property. It's the cost to prepare the site. It's the cost, of course, to rebuild, but it's also some additional costs that don't automatically come to mind. For example, building codes change over time. So the method of construction and style of home that you have right now might actually not be feasible to build back in exactly the same way because of changes to building codes. Also, things like bushfire alert levels and other similar requirements. There's similar requirements for flooding, you know, also should be taken into account, or must be taken into account when considering the cost of rebuilding. The other one, which I mean, arguably is more consistently underestimated, is actually the cost of replacing all of your stuff. It's a real eye-opener, and I sort of put the challenge out, if you've got, you know, if you've got some time over the weekend, to go for a walk through your house, you know, go into a bedroom, go into your kitchen. Doesn't need to be the whole house for the exercise, but just start and go through every drawer, every cupboard, and put a value to everything that's in there. You know, of course, all of the furniture and appliances and that sort of thing as well. And I've done it myself, and it's quite mind-blowing when you start to think of every knife, fork, t-shirt, shoe. When you start putting values to all of these things, it can really add up, and that's empowering, because you know, you can then make decisions around, you know, the level of risk, you know, you're prepared to take there. Third point is, so you understand what your risks are now, the hazards that you might be exposed to near and far. You know, you've got some plans in place. You know how you want to protect things that are most important to you. You know, for those physical things, the costs to replace those things. So if insurance falls into your plan, then you know, strongly recommend exploring the market. The Insurance Council of Australia has a service called findaninsurer.com.au. It's not affiliated, you know, with any you know, insurance brand at all. It's really just a repository of insurers that provide covers for certain, you know, different types of things. And if you felt you know, the advice of an insurance broker would be of benefit to you, then visiting the National Insurance Brokers Association website at niba.com.au. They've also got a tool very easily accessible from the homepage there, where you can find a local broker that might be able to help you out with your insurance needs. But to lift it back up to exploring the market, there's other services out there as well. There's Compare the Market and Choosy and you know, any number of different services out there where you can compare different products. But the overarching theme there is to explore the market, get some quotes, you know, read those policy disclosure or product disclosure documents, rather to make sure that coverage lines up with your knowledge of the hazards that you're exposed to and you know, the level of cover that you need. Okay, so now just taking a little bit of a shift into, I guess, some information that you know might be of value to you right now, given your experience over the last several weeks. This is just a sort of a generic overview of the claim process. These steps largely apply in any claim. The significance of each step, you know, will vary depending on your specific claim situation. But generally, once you've you know, lodged your claim, whether that be on the phone or online, if you have building damage that is unsafe or is exposing you know, your home to the elements, your insurer will look to arrange a make safe, and generally that will and should be arranged with quite a level of urgency. These are generally temporary type repairs, if you like, that the intention is simply to make safe, block from the elements until such a time that you know, an assessment can be completed and repairs you know, can start. This should also include, so you know, make it's in the lingo, if you like, make safe. This would also include if there's any concerns with electricity, whether that be, you know, exposed wiring or damaged electrical componentry, including solar panels. These things would be made, or should be made safe at that time. The next step is assessing the damage. So this could be really one of three people that might come out to do that. It could be an insurance assessor that's directly employed by your insurance company. Many insurers have partnership agreements with third-party insurance assessors, and one of the reasons that they do that is so that they can scale up their response as needed, so they can, you know, use those third parties to increase the number of assessors that they have in the field at any given point in time. And it could also be a builder, depending on the sense, you know, and the extent of the damage. It could actually be a builder that is coming out to do that assessment. And what that's about is it's about understanding what happened in the first instance. It's about surveying the property and then the actual damage. And it's at this point, oftentimes, where specialists, it becomes clear that some sort of specialist needs to be involved in the process. So that could be, you know, an engineer if there's suspected structural damage, for example. It could be an asbestos cleanup specialist, although, you know, that could well be identified much earlier in the piece as well, during the make safe. Moving on from the assessment then, the next stage is the scope of work or statement of work, it's called sometimes. That's the stage where the information that's been gathered through that make safe process, through the assessment process, and from you through the claim lodgement and the conversations, you know, that you will have had with the assessor, for example. That's where all this information essentially sort of gets put together, and a scope of work or an itemised list of all of the building work, and it's specific for building work, is put together. This should be provided to you ultimately in writing. It's not uncommon that scope of work will need to be iterated through a number of times. There's a couple of reasons for that. The assessors and builders don't always pick up the finer details, that are really obvious to you because it's your home. So those things can be missed from time to time. So certainly providing that feedback through and getting that scope of work updated and iterated through is not an uncommon thing, and absolutely is what should be happening if there's items that are missed from that scope of work. Once everything's sort of in order in terms of the scope of work, then the claim will sort of move into that repair stage, but also cash settlement stage. And I just made a note there in Alexandra from Legal Aid, her presentation. There was mention of cash settlements there. This space, the repair or cash settlement, is a really important stage of the claim, and it's a really important decision to make. And I think the advice to seek advice if you feel you need it, and certainly for that independent view, is really something to consider, particularly in that decision around to have the insurer manage the repair versus accepting a cash settlement, or requesting a cash settlement rather. If you're requesting a cash settlement, it's important to understand that compliance with regulations and building codes, using of course using a licensed builder, all of these things that the insurer would manage, where they're managing the overall repair, ultimately falls to you and the builder that you would appoint to do the job. If the job isn't done properly, or it's not done completely, then that can have implications, or if at all, as well. I have seen that as well. That can have implications in the insurability of your home or that building moving forward. So it is a really important stage, and something to really consider deeply there. There are some situations where a cash settlement is the only mode or option for settlement, and the sort of number one example there is where it's a total loss, what we call a total loss. So it's a sort of a very harsh term, but essentially if the building is completely destroyed, or the sum insured is exceeded in terms of what a repair might cost, and the same applies for contents, then it would be deemed a total loss and a cash settlement. And I think in those situations, the advice that Alexandra also provided around seeking some financial counselling is a really sensible piece of advice to consider if you find yourself in that situation. The other, and sort of the final stage, I guess, if you like, and is it applicable to everyone, is the sort of feedback and complaints process. So any decision that's made on a claim can be disputed. So nothing in that first instance is final. And in the first instance, let your insurer know that you're not satisfied or you don't agree with that decision, and that will trigger that review process. And then beyond that, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, or AFCA, as it is referred to, is the completely independent review of a dispute if it can't be resolved before it gets there. COVID-19. So look, this is a tough one. There are some consequences of the pandemic that are impacting the insurance industry at the moment, and this is impacting the insurance industry, or it's impacting more than just the insurance industry, but of course in the context of the insurance industry. And these are national issues. They're not specific to your community, that they're impacting everyone nationally. The first is global supply chains are impacted, and in particular in the building materials space, but even more broadly, in some electronics items and these sorts of things as well. This is having a twofold effect. First is in pricing. So in many cases the prices are going up, and the second is just in the availability, the outright availability, or the lead times for some items. The other impact relates to lockdowns and border crossings. So as I mentioned before, there's a number of significant events that are occurring and under management at any time nationally. The insurance industry workforce can almost be considered as a national workforce, and insurers, will sort of move their teams around to respond where they're most needed. And that model, if you like, has been really challenged throughout the pandemic, with either the inability to cross the border into a state to help the folks in that state. The other way is often an even more significant challenge. So when we would cycle people through in sort of 2-week or 4-week sort of blocks, getting them home has been a real challenge, or just impossible as well. Then the actual, might not be the border crossing that's the issue, but the lockdowns that might be in place. Perfect example is the construction industry lockdowns in Victoria earlier in the year. So an industry specific lockdown created really significant challenges for the insurance industry and the supply chains to respond. We've been doing quite a bit of advocacy. Insurance Council's been doing quite a bit of advocacy in this space, and we have made some progress in terms of the emergency management protocol being updated to include insurance disaster responders. We're also mindful that this particular issue will start to become less of a factor as borders start to open. So, for example, South Australia is borders opening 23rd of November. Queensland borders are on track to open the 17th of December, and these issues start to go away for us. I'll stop there. I hope there's been something you found insightful and useful in amongst there. I'm really keen to hear questions and feedback that anyone has.
Thank you so much, Liam. That was a really great presentation and some really, really useful content. And I think, like you said, it's so important not just to think of insurance when we're in recovery mode after a disaster, but also to think about it beforehand so that when disaster does arise, we can be as resilient as possible through having the means to recover with insurance, with support from our insurance. So really, really great content. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and the first question was one that came up yesterday. Mm-hmm. And this resident is online again today. So the question is, in regards to the pitch of the tiled roof of the home, it was deemed by the assessor inspection at 18 degrees, but they believe it's 20 degrees in the correct build to code. The house was built in 1984. The assessor from the NRMA has said that they cannot warrant the repairs. We don't understand how we could pay for 35 years insurance, and it all comes down to the pitch of the roof.
Yeah. That's a pretty technical question. Thank you. Look, what I would say there is that if something was built, so there will always be an issue if something's not being built to code, right? So at the time it wasn't built to code, that has the potential to create issues straight up. The second point to that is, or that comes into consideration there is, well, did the homeowner know about that, or could they have reasonably, been expected, to know about? So, for example, if the owner was the person that did the building, then there probably would be quite a high expectation that they would have known that. But the average person who's bought a house and done the pre-inspection, the inspection report and that kind of thing, and that didn't raise any issues, has done what they could reasonably do. If it's built to code, then that in of itself, shouldn't be a problem in terms of the insurance per se, but there can be some issues that arise with new building combined with old building, to put it that way. So where a structure was built to code, at the time, but then there's some new building that's sort of going to that can be an issue for builders. So my advice on that one is, wherever your insurer is making a decision, they should be explaining that to you, the basis of that decision in the first instance, and you should feel absolutely entitled to ask as many questions as you need to in order to fully understand that basis, right? So in this case, they've said it's 18 degrees, it should be 20, it can't be warranted. A question that sort of might flow on from that is, well, why does that mean that it's not warranted? So I think digging a little bit deeper with your insurer is really, really important to really get to the bottom of why that decision's being made. And then at any point during that process, if you just don't agree or don't accept that decision, then you have access to the complaints process that that both Alexandra and I have spoken to.
Beautiful, thanks so much. Another question from community: is there a checklist that people can use when considering insurance for both residents and businesses? Is there a benchmark or framework for home and business replacement, for example, per square metre, for understanding that contents is different?
Yep. So I'm sort of interpreting from that sort of a checklist of like how to figure out what my sum insured might be. Yeah, look, this is a really tricky space, and there's not an ideal. I'll just be straight up. There's not an ideal solution for this. The square meter one, that is so fraught. Because it's sort of an average of averages, right? And almost no individual property will be the average. You know what I mean? So that could be quite dangerous. And unfortunately, many of the calculators that are out there sort of are at that really high level. A number of the insurers, or all insurers, will have some insured calculators that will sort of guide through. The difficult part with that is where there are those BAL considerations and the flooding considerations. So yeah, look, it's not a great, I don't have a great answer for that one. And I think it really is a great question, because it highlights that there's no sort of simple, solution for that. I think though, I think that's something though that I'll take a note, because I think ICA, can have a role in this space, and if it really is, a need, well, it really is a need, I think, is the point, to help folks understand, what sort of coverage they need. So it's a really good question. It highlights there's no simple solution.
That's great. Thanks, Liam. The next question is, what is being done to advise people around underinsurance? And is there anything being done to eliminate around people with no insurance?
What's being done? That's a tricky one. We acknowledge that there is a broad issue with underinsurance nationally. It's not isolated. I think part of the solution is around education. So, part of what I spoke to was, to try and bring some of these ideas, to front of mind. I think that the question around, are there calculators, are there tools to help us? I think that draws out that there is a bit of a deficiency in that space, and an opportunity to build tools. And it wouldn't be appropriate to ignore the fact that in many cases, the reason there is underinsurance is because of the affordability of insurance. And that really links into sort of my first comments around the cost of natural disasters, and that is a cost that's increasing year on year. It's quite breathtaking. It's just super critical that we're advocating for change in that space, and that there is a commitment federally and at state and at local levels to investing, in resilience and mitigation. And I mean, what we're doing here today is absolutely, absolutely part of that. And I know that one's a little, that's a little bit further removed from individuals, but it's a really, really important, really important and critical part of that conversation.
Sort of as a bit of a flow onto that, Liam. So one of the things that we have seen in some of our recent disaster events that you touched on with your answer there was around the fact that we're seeing people with very high excesses, that people are setting their excess quite high to bring down, to make insurance more affordable for them. Yep. One question that was asked to me recently was around whether or not that excess, if a person does need to make a claim and they're having issues with paying their excess, can that be deducted from a cash settlement amount or an insurance settlement if they go through that process?
Yeah, so look, we're and again, this is in general, this is sort of a general statement, the policies, and I don't mean the product disclosure statement, I mean sort of the internal policies and processes will be slightly different at each insurer, but in general terms, if a claim is going to be cash settled, the excess will be deducted. That's the standard thing that happens. I mean, it would, it would be sort of inefficient for someone to pay their, excess and then get another, sort of check. So that's pretty well, pretty well standard. If someone is has challenges with paying their excess, then it could be the case that they're suffering some financial hardship at that point in time, or in fact, the requirement to pay the excess, would put them in financial hardship. And there are provisions set out in the General Insurance Code of Practice that talks through if someone is experiencing financial hardship, what insurers will do and are required to do in those situations. So very simply, the advice to everyone is if you are in that situation, is to contact your insurer and talk to them about financial hardship.
That's great. Thanks, Liam. That is something that comes up, has come up quite a bit in our recent storm event. Another question that came up in the recent storm event, and that was also a question that was frequently asked during the 2019-20 bushfires as well, was around where there's wear and tear on a property. So what we have heard from some residents is that they're in older buildings and they had obviously an insured value of the property, an agreed value of the property that they've been paying their insurance for. But then when the assessors came out, there's sort of a question around what damage was wear and tear on the building from age, or property maintenance is another thing that we've seen referred to as well, lack of property maintenance in some insurance documents, and that bringing down the cash settlement amount. If a person feels as though there's sort of an unreasonable amount of costs that's been deducted for wear and tear or age of the building, how would they go about getting support to advocate on their behalf?
For sure. So I think the first thing that I'd call out is that there's a whenever an insurance sort of policy is taken out, there'll be a range of questions that are asked, and some of those questions will be asked again at the renewal or through the renewal process, and whether that's you're phoning up to do that renewal or in writing. And it's a general sort of expectation that the property that's being insured is sort of maintained, is reasonably maintained, to use that language. Now, that's going to be different for different types of property, right? The condition or the expected condition, of a home that was built 2 years ago is going to be different than a building or a home that's 70 years old, for example, right? So that the expectation is different, but the principle that the property is sort of well maintained and properly maintained for its age is sort of an expectation that sits there. So if there has been some adjustment of a settlement because of wear and tear or sort of alleged lack of maintenance, then if that's not reasonable, or the customer doesn't deem that reasonable, my advice in the first instance is always talk to your insurer about it. And I guess back to the point that I was making before, don't ever feel like you shouldn't ask clarifying questions, right? Often it'll be statements like, wear and tear, or what did you mean by that? What would the expectations have been, to dig down into it. But certainly the complaints process. So I think that what I would say about the complaint process is that doesn't have to be, that's not about being a combative process. It's not pistols at dawn with your insurer. It's a process, it's a formal process that exists specifically for the situations where there's a disagreement, and it's there for customers to access, where you just can't get on the same page for any reason. So I always say, have that open line of communication, ask questions to really clarify. But that complaint process, ultimately, the reason that it's there is if you can't get on the same page with your insurer, then look to access that process for sort of a review, and that can then potentially, depending on how that progresses, that potentially leads to being able to access the external process with AFCA.
Thanks, Liam. That's a great response. That's very helpful. I had another question, two that sort of relate to each other. One is around a scope of work. So a question that has come up a few times in the last couple of weeks is around where a proposed cash settlement is maybe going to take place, and a resident is given a scope of works for the insurance company, but the quoted amounts per repair are redacted. Is that common that those the repair amounts are redacted, even in situations where people are asked to seek additional scope of works before making a decision about a cash settlement?
Yes, it is. It is common. So the reason for that is that in most cases, not all cases, in most cases, insurers have supplier panels. So they go through a procurement process, a tendering process to find builders, and engineers and any kind of other suppliers that they will contract with to do the insurance repairs. The rates, the labour rates and the margins on those rates, and even material prices in some cases are all actually dealt with in those commercial agreements between the insurer and that builder, and are commercially sensitive for that reason. So it's common that type of detail is redacted from scopes of work. What shouldn't be redacted, or there's no reason that I can see that should be redacted, is the line item detail of a scope. So 40 meters of gyprock supply, and install. But that, I don't see any reason why that should be redacted. And in fact, it being redacted is problematic in terms of being able to communicate actually what's in and out of scope, or for getting comparison quotes. And also, what I don't see is a reason that should be redacted is sort of the overall price, right? That ultimately is important as well, because that would be ultimately the number that a cash settlement's based on, or to be able to compare the pricing, with another builder. So that unit sort of level pricing. So hourly rates and those sorts of things will typically be redacted because of that commercial sensitivity. But the line item detail and the bottom price, I don't see any reason that they should be redacted, and it would be counterproductive to do that. So if anyone is receiving a scope of work where that information is sort of also redacted, then I think that's a question, or that's a challenge back to the insurer to sort of say, well, how can I, how do I know what is actually in the scope, and how could I, get a comparative, quote if I wanted to as well.
That's great. Thank you. That will be, that's really helpful information. Sort of along those lines too. So we have people who've been asked to go out and get their own scope of works on top of their, the scope of works from the insurance company. And it's sort of, it's creating a bit of nerves for some people because of the delay with getting tradesmen out to do those scope of works assessments. And the flow on from that is that people then become quite nervous about only having the 12 months insurance cover for a rental property while they rebuild or repair. Is there any scope for residents who are facing delays with their rebuild or with their repair work to ask for an extension of that 12 months of rental assistance that's covered by an insurance company?
Look, there is certainly always scope to have, to have that conversation. This is, I've just made a note of that one in particular because it's something that I'll take away to have a chat with the insurer group about. So I think the first thing is it's not unheard of that insurer might ask someone to get a quote, but I'm sort of inclined. I do understand in these current circumstances that might create a bit of nervousness. So I think in the first instance, again, I come back to a point about asking questions. Don't ever feel like you can't ask a question or you shouldn't ask a question. The first thing that comes to mind for there is, why do you want me to go and get why do you want me to go and get these quotes? So can you go and get other quotes, for example? Can you leverage your agreements to make that happen more quickly, right? So that's sort of the first thing there. The second thing is, yeah, absolutely, as part of that conversation, raise the concerns about that time frame. And a question maybe to ask is, so if it was the case that because of this delay and the size of my repair, that it was to go beyond 12 months, what would you do? What would you do in those circumstances in terms of my temporary accommodation? And at that point they'll give an answer, and that then becomes a sort of a trigger point potentially for a complaint process, right? If that's not a satisfactory outcome from your perspective, then that might be a trigger to sort of let them know that you're not happy about that and that you want it reviewed. As a general statement, it is certainly not lost on insurers the impacts in the supply chain. It is significant, and we are seeing pricing, as I mentioned, pricing is changing. There are lead times are growing and growing in terms of supply of materials. The border challenges, although that will start to ease, has meant that there's also been a real strain on just the availability of trades as well. So these are factors that are well known and understood with insurers, and they do understand the flow-on impacts of that. So I can't commit them to anything, and nor would it be appropriate to. I just wanted to just express and be clear that these factors aren't ignored or lost on the insurer group, but certainly I've made a note here myself. I think that's a really good question to be asking, and I love the forward thinking element of it as well. It's something I want to raise with the insurer group, certainly.
So we've got one in the chat, but you've largely answered the majority of it. So okay. It was more about the scopes of works blacked out. They've been told to go ahead and get their own builder contractor reports, but there's no builders available. So you just touched on that answer there. I guess the one that's remaining for this question, is that the quotes then get forwarded to the insurance company. Do they, meaning the insurance company, pay the higher value or hand over the lower dollar value? Do I have a choice? This also adds the anxiety of getting my house back to normal.
Sure. The first part of my response to this one is going to be a little bit sharp, but I hope it's taken taken in, no one would pay on a like-for-like basis. So I'll just call that out first, critical like-for-like basis. No one would pay the higher amount. I wouldn't personally. I challenge whether anyone would on a like-for-like basis, and that's the critical point to it, and that's why it's really, really important that that line item detail is available in the scopes, right? If one scope of work is, and just numbers for the sake of numbers, if one scope of work is 150,000 and another scope of work is 120,000, but the 120,000 only has 2/3, say, of the scope called out, and that other third is actually required, in order to rebuild the property, then that is totally not appropriate. That the settlement, would be based on the lower amount in those circumstances. But if there is, if they match 100% in terms of, those line items, they're both reputable, licensed, builders, essentially the same, and one is quoting 150,000 and the other one is quoting 140,000, then 140,000 will be the basis of the settlement. If that builder can do that, is prepared to do that scope of work for that price, then that's what the basis of the settlement will be. But it must be like for like. That's the key. And an indicator that something's not like for like is if there is a huge difference in price. I have to say, if it is all on the same basis, someone's not going to be able to. So, builder A quotes for 150, builder B's, quotes 100,000. I mean, you're not going to be able to do the same work at that sort of difference in price. So I think there's definitely, something to be mindful of is if there are two quotes and they're hugely different in terms of price, then that's a pretty solid indicator that they're not on a like for like basis. There's something not right there. So like for like basis has to be like for like basis, but the lower price will always be the settlement. I challenge anyone really on that one, that no one would pay the higher price if everything is equal.
Just one more question before we wrap up, Liam, and it's a question that comes up, I think, after all different types of natural disasters, particularly in rural areas like Wollondilly and Wingecarribee, is something that people never think about with their insurance policies, quite often around trees and the cleanup of dangerous trees after. So one of the questions that we get asked a lot is around, I guess, what sort of trees, either dangerous trees on the ground or clearing of fallen trees and things, might be considered by an insurance company. A lot of people are told that it's only trees that will be a threat to structures or neighbouring properties. Are you able to give a bit of clarity about what people's expectations might be around cleanup?
Yeah, absolutely. So as so this is general, right? I have to say, you have to consider your specific product disclosure statement, and if you were shopping around, you have to consider those different product disclosure statements. But in general, domestic home insurance policies don't cover the land and the flora that might be on that land, so gardens and trees and that sort of thing, just as a general principle, right? They're not considered part of the building or part of the contents, which is the two sort of top level categories of property in a home insurance policy. In general, though, policies cover what's often called removal of debris, right? So in the context of trees, what that generally means is that if a tree or part of a tree has caused damage to the property, to what's called sort of the insurable property, so that'll generally be the building and the contents and fences, like boundary fences are generally included in that definition. If a part of a tree or a tree has fallen and caused damage to those items of property, and that was caused by an insured event, so it didn't just sort of fall of its own volition, because it was unwell, then generally that will be covered by the removal of debris will be covered under the policy. That's really it in terms of the coverage. If there are, and sometimes it's sort of referred to, sort of trees in the field, in an open field, that fall or are damaged as a result of an insured event, if they don't cause subsequent damage to property, then they're not covered under the claim. The other one is dangerous. So in the example where a large branch comes off of a tree in a big storm and lands on a homestone, causes damage, that's sort of cleaned up and removed, but there may well be that damaged tree there. That's much more of a grey area, and insurers will typically consider the imminent risk that sort of exists there to damaging the insurable property, but is really sort of a case by case proposition. There are some, and not many, but there are a couple of products in market that offer, I suppose you'd call them, premium products. So they extend the cover in some of these benefits, or you can sort of buy an add-on, to extend the coverage for those benefits. But as a general principle, if it hasn't sort of fallen onto the insurable property and caused damage, then it's not covered under the policy.
Great, thank you so much, Liam. That was so informative. Obviously, it's a hot topic.
Yep.
If there are any more questions, what we'll do is we'll forward them on to you and provide those contact details.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, beautiful. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone that's joined us today. We appreciate your time. Thank you for taking time out of a beautiful Saturday. Tomorrow we do have Anne Leadbeater and the Recovery Support Service joining us tomorrow from 10 a.m. So please make sure you tune in, grab a cup of coffee and spend the morning with us. But again, thank you so much for having us today. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just a huge thank you to all of our speakers today. I think this, for most people going through a disaster event, it's often the first time that they've made an insurance claim, or the first time that they've maybe needed to access legal support or other support services. So just to have more information about how to go through that process is invaluable. And I think it's going to be really valuable for our residents that were impacted by the fires and the storms.
Yeah, beautiful. Right, well, thank you and see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.